Welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad you're here, and we are going to get right into it. I am sitting down to record this episode for you just a few days after the shooting at the hands of ICE of Renee Good, a 37-year-old woman in the state of Minnesota. She had just dropped off her 6-year-old kid at school. And I mentioned that specifically because my daughter is exactly 6 years old. And I remember the day I heard this news, which was the day that it happened, seeing images of this woman's car filled with stuffies. And Gianna, my daughter, she loves stuffies. And the reason that I'm starting off this episode like this, just so raw and just right to it, I know I'm starting pretty raw here, is because that is what this series is about. We are processing these kinds of videos. And they're not videos like a movie, it's videos of something that happened in our community. We are processing these kinds of images, like the image that I saw of her car just filled with stuffies, and the emotions and the feelings and the nervous system response that triggered in me for then me needing to process that and navigate that. And we are processing these kinds of headlines, these kinds of images, videos, headlines, or maybe, and for some people, I didn't see this in person, but for many who were there, they are processing having lived that moment in real life. And this is just one example. And because I know as a collective, many of us, experienced our own version of processing this information, these images, this specific headline. That's why I wanted to start here, is that this is the reality of what so many of us are processing. This is the heaviness of it. This is the truth of it. It is raw. It can be heavy. And so I remember when I saw that video, I saw it just a couple of hours after it had happened. I could not sleep that night. That night, hours after I had seen the video, I could feel my nervous system was still jacked up, on edge, and for good reason. My nervous system, my mind, my emotions were all still processing what the fuck I had seen and what is happening. All of the context happening around that, leading to that moment, and even a lot of the reactions and response after the moment, and how leadership has responded, all of that as well. And I will share vulnerably. I will share this vulnerably. Over the next few days following that, I also grieved how this was not the first person whose life had been lost at the hands of ICE. It was the first white woman that we'd seen captured so clearly on video. And let me be very, very clear, it is horrific. There is some undeniable grief that I will share with you. Also witnessing such a different response for the loss of life of different people based on where they come from, the color of their skin, and all of that. And so this is where we're starting part 6 of this series today. And I am going to be talking about ancestral resilience and generational power. And even though I started off really raw here, what we're unpacking together in this episode holds so much power. I cannot tell you how much power and healing that I have sourced and resourced from my ancestors, this ancestral resilience and generational power. And I can't even imagine, I cannot even begin to imagine how me personally, would be navigating all of this that is happening around us, and maybe even directly. Everyone's experience is different, of course, but I cannot even imagine how I would be navigating all of this without being tapped into ancestral resilience and generational power. And so what so many of us are navigating and processing as a collective, it is raw, it is real, it is heavy. It's why I started off this episode exactly where I did. We're not sugarcoating it. And again, I do also want to be very clear. This is just one example. I know there are so many things happening all over the world, so many things that are also real, raw, heavy, horrific, where there's loss, where there's grief, where there's fear, where there's all of this. And along with that, if there's one thing that I would hope that you can take away from today's episode, from this conversation, is that you have yet another place to resource yourself and to source power from. Like I said, I can't even tell you how much power that I have sourced from my ancestors and their resilience. And so I'm going to be sharing with you how you can start doing this for yourself, or at least offer some suggestions. There's not one exact way to do this. Every single person is going to be different, but I'll share some options and some of what has been helpful for me. If you're not already feeling tapped into your own ancestral resilience, and or even if you want to build on that and fortify that connection even more. And along with that, as is my goal and my purpose in this series, I will be sharing 3 examples of how this has looked like for me. What exactly has it looked like for me over the past year? I'm going to be sharing real examples from my real life. What has it looked like to source resilience from my ancestors, to be tapped into this generational power as we navigate hard, challenging, real, raw things. So I'll share some examples from my real life for these moments when shit hits the fan, just like it did this past week with this particular event that so many of us processed and are still processing and navigating as a collective. And also when shit hits the fan for stuff in your own life, your own personal moments of shit hitting the fan, and my own personal moments of shit hitting the fan. And one other really important thing that I want to add in here, this is really, really important, and especially for everything that we talk about on this podcast that has to do with your relationship with food, with your relationship with your body. Once I healed my relationship with my body and my relationship with food, that was a big thing for me that was getting in the way with my connection to self. Because instead of being in relationship with my body, there was this striving towards fixing my body. And instead of being in relationship with what information is my body giving me? How do I feel? Am I satiated? Am I hungry? Instead of that deep body connection, there was all this noise in my mind as well of, you're supposed to eat at this time. You're not doing that right. You're doing it wrong. You should be doing it better. And shame and failure. There was so much noise, a lot of it that was coming from diet culture, from patriarchy, from these colonized ideas of, and these diet culture ideas of, here's what you're supposed to look like. Here's how you're supposed to eat. Here's blah, 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 blah. There was so much noise getting in the way of me being connected with my own body. And so once I healed my relationship with my body and healed my relationship with food and with my emotions, and I really restored actually that connection with my body and quieted the noise of diet culture that had taught me not to trust myself, that had taught me actually all of these ways of thinking that really weren't actually productive or helpful and not kind at all. Once I quieted all that noise and restored my relationship with my body through that process, what was also restored was this connection, not only with myself and my body, but it also cleared the way for connecting deeply with my body's wisdom and also ancestral wisdom. And I believe that we all have ancestral wisdom. I believe we all have ancestral wisdom, every single one of us. And in fact, don't take it from me. There is literature. We're going to talk about some of the literature. But I want to share this with you because I think it is so beautiful and so powerful that we are not here in spite of who we are and where we come from. We are here because of who we are and where we come from. I'm going to say that again. In fact, I'll actually say it a little bit different. And feel free to repeat it wherever you are. Say it out loud. Pause the episode. Say it out loud. I am not here in spite of who I am and where I come from. I am here because of who I am and where I come from. There is so much power in this. And I do want to add this note, as we're talking about ancestors, this doesn't mean that our families and our lineages are perfect. I will be the first to say that I have done a lot of generational healing. I've had to do and will continue to do my fair share of generational healing. So this is not about ancestors being perfect. Our ancestors are not perfect. Our ancestors are human. My ancestors, your ancestors. But I think this is such an important piece to have be a part of this conversation. In my experience, there's been more talk over the last years, maybe over the last decade or so, a bit more airtime, I think, given to generational trauma, which is important. It is important, in my opinion, in my experience, in my own personal experience. And generational healing work, like I said, I've done so much of that myself, and it's been very important. But in this conversation, what we are doing is also naming not just the generational or ancestral trauma, but the ancestral resilience, the generational brilliance, the generational power, the generational wisdom, because that was also handed down to you. And it is in your DNA, literally. Because for each of us, you being here, me being here, alive today, you are the descendant of ancestors, and I am the descendant of ancestors. And actually, one thing that makes me smile thinking about, and also I definitely feel into this responsibility in a powerful way. I am also an ancestor of my descendants. So when I put myself and I see myself in that way, it just gives me a really powerful, for me, vantage point of how is it that I want to do things? What are the things that matter? But all of that to say, we are giving airtime today because it matters. And especially in this moment, as we're talking about self-care practices for times of injustice and rising fascism, intentionally tapping into a resource, a source of strength, of power that is here for you, which is ancestral resilience and generational power. We could also call it ancestral wisdom. You can change the name up, call it what feels good for you. But most important, notice the way that I'm talking about this. And you'll also be able to see this and hear this in my examples that I'm going to share with you. We're not just talking about coping, quote unquote, coping here, just kind of like surviving, although that's part of it. And also it's an important part of it. The coping and the actual survival, that is important. But we're not only talking about that. I'm inviting you into a deep, deep ancestral resilience and wisdom and source of power. I mentioned earlier that there's literature, so let's talk about that a bit here. There is research on ancestral healing and generational resilience that shows this. It shows that what gets passed down isn't just the wounds, isn't just the trauma. It's also strength, adaptation, creativity, patterns that helped our ancestors persist and thrive. And so there is research supporting this. And what we're naming here, resilience, wisdom, legacy, that is what today we're calling ancestral resilience and generational power. So it really is this call, hey, let's not forget something that you've inherited. It is in you, and that is this resilience, this deep ancestral wisdom and resilience and generational power. Let's not forget it. It is here. It is in you. When it comes to generational impact, generational resilience is this ability to adapt and thrive despite historic harm throughout history. So when we think back to each of us, of course, will have different ancestors and lineages and what histories have intersected in different ways. For example, I've shared some of my own family history. I'm first generation Mexican American. So both of my parents immigrated here to the United States from Mexico. But looking at the history in Mexico, well, what is now modern day Mexico, there was colonization that happened there. The Spanish came to that area back hundreds and hundreds of years ago, colonized. There was harm there. That's part of the history. But my ancestors had the ability to adapt and thrive despite that historic harm in that place and time. And I don't even want to share too much of the history there and go too much into the history there because I am going to be sharing examples. But I only gave a little snippet of that because, as I've said in every episode of this series, center your own experience. Your ancestors, your ancestral resilience, and your generational power is going to have a different flavor than mine. It's going to have a different history than mine. And that's a beautiful thing. And so what we're doing is intentionally shifting towards and accessing this ancestral mode of resilience and wisdom. And we can ground in this. We can ground in this emotionally, logistically, spiritually, physically, all kinds of ways you can ground and feel resourced via the resilience of your ancestors and generational power without, this part's important, without diminishing the reality of current injustice, without diminishing the current reality, period. Your current reality, the reality in your life, even outside of things that are happening in the collective, there's also whatever you're navigating in your life. So it's tapping into this ancestral resilience and this generational power without diminishing your lived experience, without diminishing the reality, the injustice, etc. And so that brings us back to, why does ancestral resilience matter now? Right now? Why does it matter right now? I think it matters always, and it's always a resource that we can tap into, always. But let's speak to it in this context. Why does ancestral resilience matter now? Why does it matter now in times of injustice? And here's what I'll say about that. When systems, oppressive systems particularly, try to strip us, not only as individuals, but as a collective or groups of people, when systems try to strip us of dignity, of rights. For example, not too long ago, I think it was like maybe 2 or 3 months ago, the Supreme Court actually ruled in favor for racial profiling, essentially. And that is wild. That is wild and also enraging for me to think, oh shit, I literally don't have equal rights anymore. I literally, me, as a brown woman, as a daughter of Mexican immigrants, like I spend a lot of my day speaking Spanish. I speak to my daughter in Spanish. My daughter, I am very proud, fluently speaks Spanish, writes Spanish, reads Spanish. We speak in Spanish a lot. With the Supreme Court, obviously, look, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an attorney, so I'm just going to use plain English for this. But basically saying, hey, if you're speaking Spanish or English with an accent, or there's certain attributes that are, Latino, Hispanic, things are going to be a little bit different for you. You can be profiled. And so this is real. It is real, part of what's happened. And so when I say, hey, systems stripping us of dignity and rights, this is real. It is not imagined. It is part of what is being navigated in this moment. Everyone to different degrees, of course. Remember, center your own experience. But what tapping into ancestral resilience has done for me is really connecting to something so deeply rooted, generations and generations and generations of resilience rooted, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years deeply rooted. that there is already a template for resilience, endurance, creativity, resistance, and resourcefulness, that I'm not starting from scratch. My ancestors navigated their own challenges and survived and thrived, not just survived, also thrived. And their DNA is in me. All of that deep knowing and wisdom and resilience is in me. And accessing that wisdom for this moment now today. And so I would say it like this. Ancestral resilience and generational power is the part of us that already knows, already in you. It's the part of you that already knows how to be resilient in this moment, how to not only survive, but thrive in this moment, because our ancestors, and I'm saying that as a collective, even though, of course, we all have different stories and histories and genetics and all of that, of course, but I'm using now ancestors in the collective. As a collective, our ancestors did survive and had to survive their own unthinkable hardships, not through denial. This part is super important. We're not doing this through denial, but through presence, resourcefulness, community, maybe dance, maybe art, maybe drumming, maybe medicines, and this refusal to abandon their own human dignity. All of that, and take the parts that resonate and that apply, is already in you for you to access and connect with. And so this is why I shared earlier in this episode that healing my relationship with my body and healing my relationship with food and really removing so much of that noise that was actually getting in the way of that connection. Even though my journey, I'll be honest with you, super honest with you, when I first set out on my journey, I literally just wanted to lose weight. I literally just wanted to lose weight. But as I set out on that journey, it really has led to something so much more beautiful and powerful than I could ever imagine for myself, and unexpected, which is this deep connection. And I feel like I'm able to tap into this ancestral resilience almost as easily as I can turn on the faucet in my kitchen. But that ability to tap into that didn't just appear overnight. And I'll share a little bit more about what has been useful for me to now feel like I can tap into that ancestral resilience and that generational power. But like I said, when I first set out on my journey, I literally just wanted to lose weight. But, turns out on my journey, it's like, oh yes, I'm healing my relationship with food because that's part of what's needed here in order to stop sabotaging and emotional eating. Oh, turns out I had to heal my relationship with my body. And then on the other side of that, I was able to access not only my own body's wisdom, but this deep and what feels like infinitely resourced connection. That is how it feels to me. It cleared the way for this accessing my own body's wisdom. And along with that, this infinite resource, this powerful, this deeply rooted infinite resource that is this ancestral resilience. That is how it feels to me. That is how I would describe it. And it is something it is priceless. I could never put a price on it. Okay, so what I'll do now is I'm going to share some stories, some of my own personal examples. What does this look like in real life? What can it look like in real life? And one more time, I'm going to remind everyone of this because it's just so freaking important. And I've said it many times throughout this entire series, but always center your experience and bring your discernment about what is true for you. Anything that doesn't feel helpful, set it aside. Bring your discernment. As I'm sharing my own examples, of course, I can only share my own examples, what has been true in my lived experience. So that is why I always say, please center your experience, center yourself, and discern from what I share, from my own lived examples, what things may be useful for you. Okay, I'm going to start off with sharing a story about my dad. My dad is a living ancestor. There is so much wisdom when he shares stories with me or tells me things. And again, no one's perfect. So trust me, I'm not sitting here saying that I don't get super pissed off and annoyed at, things with my dad and blah, blah, blah. When we talk about ancestors are not perfect. Ancestors are imperfect humans as well. But there is so much wisdom and power that I have borrowed from things that I've learned from my dad. So I'm going to start with this example because it is just so palpable. Like my dad is a living ancestor. And so let me just tell you the story. Once upon a time, maybe like 10, actually more than 10 years ago, maybe like 20 years ago, my dad told me this story, the story that I'm going to tell you, the story he told me. My dad worked as a landscaper for my entire life, actually before I was even born. So for about 40 years, my dad did landscaping, he did yard work, he owned his own company, and there were moments in his business where it was just him, especially at the start, where it was just him. He would have his clients, he would show up, do the work he was there to do, mow their lawns, trim palm trees or whatever it may be. And then there was also times where his business grew much bigger and he may have 2-3 guys working with him or maybe one other guy working with him. And so here's the story my dad told me, like probably about 20 years ago, he told me this story. And by the way, the story was nowhere on my radar until recently. So my dad told me the story that he was doing work at one of his clients' homes. And this man, a white man, and my dad is Mexican, short, brown Mexican, like thick accent, thick as they come. I'm just smiling over here thinking about my dad because I love him. But anyways, they were doing work and my dad overheard the man being condescending and saying derogatory racial slurs to the 2 guys that were there working with him. So what my dad told me is he walked over to the guys that were working with him and he said, agarren sus cosas y vámonos, which means grab your things and let's go. And the thing that I captured, well, the story's not over, but I'm just going to say this note here. The thing that I just like landed so powerfully for me is the way he told me the story is like, he didn't even need like a minute to think about what needed to be done here. Like he knew, oh no, we don't like tolerate this. He didn't tell me what he was thinking. He just told me what he did. And as they were gathering their things to go, the man came over to my dad and said, hey, I paid for you to do this work. And my dad, I'm going to tell you the story raw and unfiltered, okay? And my dad opened his wallet, pulled out $100 bill and said to the man, I don't need your fucking money, and gave him $100. And to share more details with you, my dad also shared with me that that guy paid them like $65 to do the work they were doing. And so what just stood out to me from that story, like the power and clarity in it, and also this like, truly, I don't need this money from you. Here you go. I'm literally going to give you more than what you gave me. That was so powerful. Because I think so much of what we see, and this is my opinion, it's what I feel I'm observing in the world right now, so much of these companies are so extractive and transactional. And it is like wild to me actually to observe sometimes the harm that they are willing to cause for a couple extra bucks. And I'm fully aware we are functioning in a capitalist world, so I am not exempt. Like I have an iPhone, right? I have a diamond ring. There is harm. It is almost impossible to not be part of some aspect of the system. But my dad had told me the story like 20 years ago, and I had not even given it a second thought. Like I had not thought about it. And recently, with so much happening in regards to ICE and so much disrespect and harm and dehumanization happening specifically in my community, as I was preparing to write a post, and if you follow me on Instagram, you saw the post. You saw the post. The post says, fuck ICE. And it also very clearly says, if you support or defend the violence and aggression of ICE, You are not welcome here as a client, a follower, or a friend. And then it says some other things, but it was when I was writing the words for this post and for this caption that I recalled the story my dad had shared with me. I recalled that story. I'm sharing this with you. I love this example because it is a living ancestor, but I was able to just so clearly connect with the energy of this story that I picked up on when my dad told me he just opened up his wallet and gave him $100. What that embodied for me is my ability to feed my family does not come from those who disrespect us. And so I think I'll leave this story here. It highlights a few different elements. This can be a living ancestor. And in fact, I'm even going to use quotations around the word ancestor. Ancestors, you can choose how that feels for you. In this example, I do feel this connection with my dad, and I actually feel this connection with one of my sisters as well. She very much feels like an elder to me, even though I'm actually like 2 years older than her. And there's certain people alive in my family that I can like tap into and really source some of that, their power, their resilience, and it feels ancestral and deep in that way. But using the word ancestor, quote unquote, loosely, because someone doesn't even have to be blood related to you for them to have that elder ancestral connection, ancestral resilience for you. And that is something that I learned directly from one of my Mayan teachers and guides. So I do want to share that with you. And I also love that example because it literally happened last week. So it's so real. It's so here. It's like me doing a business. Well, it was kind of a business activity, but it also was just like a human activity, me using my voice on a social media platform, a little bit of both. And so what does this look like? How can this support you? How can this help? For me, it has been to powerfully inform bold decisions in my business, in my work, in the work that I do, and also in the use of my voice in this moment of history in my community, which that is something that is important to me. And so that is one example that I want to share with you. Here's another example that I will share with you. You may have heard me mention this on the podcast before, but a couple of years ago, I started studying cacao as medicine. And so this is something in Mesoamerican cultures and these ancient communities, cacao was literally a medicine. And you may not know this, so I like to share this. I geek out on this stuff. Interestingly enough, right, the Spaniards came, they wanted the gold. That is one of the things that they saw as the most valuable. The Mayan culture actually valued cacao higher and more so than gold. That is how much value it held for them. I mean, I can't speak directly for them, but from what I've studied and learned, that is how much value something that was medicinal and healing held for them. That was like their hierarchy was different. So anyways, this example I'm going to keep brief because I actually want to spend a little bit more time on the next example. But this is very like palpable and physical. I, in my kitchen, have cacao, raw ceremonial cacao. And I will, when I feel called to ceremony, I will take time and do that. And that feels sacred and deeply connected and deeply healing. I think of it as like very physical because it is a plant. It is something that I can literally drink and feel in my body, and it goes into my body and my body receives that. And I won't even go into all the different healing properties, although there are so many, but I can access it physically in the here and now. And there is so much history in it. And so as I share that, you can almost do a little treasure hunt, looking at your ancestors, looking at your lineage. And I'm using ancestors with little bunny ears, quote unquote. use the term in the way that it best resonates, but is there a medicine? Is there a drum? Is there a certain sound? Is there a certain practice? These are just a few of the things that are popping into my mind, but that is most certainly not an exhaustive list. So I'm so curious what comes up for you. And then I have a third example. I have shared this example one other time on the podcast, but I freaking am obsessed with this. If you haven't heard of the Purépecha people, so most people have heard of the Aztecs, right? And thinking about modern day Mexico and Mesoamerican times, the Aztec Empire, right? Well, there was also the Purépecha Empire. And the Purépechas were in the area that is now modern day Michoacán. And that is where my parents are from. And so I want to tell you a little bit of the story, just the super Cliff Notes version of my Purépecha ancestors and how it's informed my journey and my work. I would say that the Purépechas were defenders of sovereignty. They were warriors of sovereignty. To put it just into like a quick sentence, my dad, the way he says it in Spanish is fueron una tribu indominable, meaning they were indomitable. No one was able to dominate or conquer the Purépechas. The Aztecs were not able to dominate and conquer the Purépechas because the Aztecs conquered and dominated a lot. But they were not able to dominate or conquer the Purépechas, and neither were the Spaniards. So when the Spanish came into what is now modern day Mexico, they also were not able to conquer and or dominate the Purépecha. And so Purépecha history, and it gives me goosebumps, shows they were examples showing that societies could stand against oppression, could stand against domination, could stand against outside control. The Purépechas not only resisted being controlled or losing their freedom, their sovereignty, their agency, but they fought to maintain their sovereignty, and they did maintain their sovereignty, even against such powers such as the Aztecs and the Spanish. And so they demonstrated being warriors for autonomy and sovereignty and maintaining their freedom. And I see that in my own journey because I remember when this area of my life that had to do with food and my weight, I knew it wasn't what I wanted. I also knew it wasn't what I deserved. It just didn't feel like that was it for me. And I never gave up on that fight for this area of my life as it pertains to feeling good in my body and actually loving my relationship with food and all of that. I never gave up on that until I truly arrived at a place where this area of my life really feels filled to the brim with sovereignty and agency and freedom and like just yummy in that way. And so I see it in my own journey. And then I see it, of course, also in my work, because then that is literally what I teach. That is literally what I share. And so it is my legacy in my work, but I can look back and see how it is my legacy in my DNA. And so those are the 3 examples that I wanted to share. They're each kind of just different levels and different aspects. And what I'll do last here, and then I'll wrap up this episode. But I love this work so much. I hope you can probably hear like how giddy, even though this episode started really raw and heavy, and a lot of what we're navigating is. It is those things. We also can access so much resilience and power, and it doesn't erase our human experience, but gives us a way to feel so solidly grounded and rooted for it and resilient in it. Okay, so the last thing I want to do here as I wrap up this episode is I do want to share some of how I've been able to tap into, like, how did I start being able to tap into this ancestral resilience? How? Because there was a point where I at least didn't knowingly and so consciously or intentionally have this connection to where now it feels like I'm turning on a faucet, right? Once I was able to access this, how did I really grow and deepen this connection to be able to tap into and access this ancestral resilience and this generational power? I'll share some of what it's looked like for me in the doing of this and the growing of this. being able to tap into this. And I'm also going to share some of what I've learned from elders, spiritual guides, and ancestral teachers. Okay, so one of the things, and I'm just going to mention a few things here, just kind of practical how. One of the things I want to share, number one, I'm going to actually share three things here. I did mention this already, but I want to say it again. Ancestors can be specific people in your lineage, but it can also be this collective ancestor energy. So that is one thing. The other thing I'll share is that sometimes it is this gradual, intentional connection building. So once I decided, okay, I want to really grow this connection with my ancestors. I want to grow this. I want to tend to it. That's a good way to describe it, because that really is how so much of this has felt for me. It's like tending to it the way you do with any other relationship, like how I tend to my marriage, to how I tend to my child, like the relationship, how I tend to being in relationship with my siblings, right? Like if I want it to grow and feel intimate and connected, I tend to those relationships. So it's like literally when you're getting to know someone, you ask them questions, you invite them for coffee, you spend more time in their presence or connecting with them. And I know that I just mentioned inviting someone to coffee. When I first started studying cacao as medicine and when I first started facilitating cacao ceremonies, I'll never forget when the mentor I was working with at that time, like she served my cup of cacao, her cup of cacao, and then one cup for the ancestors. And just like, this is here for them, or we're thinking of them, come and join us. Things like that. That's just one small example. So that intentional connection building gradually happens over time. And it's like tending to a relationship that you want to grow and deepen. And that's what it's been for me over the last few years. And to the point now, some of you may get this, and for some, it may feel like, okay, I don't even know what that means, but maybe one day it will make sense. To the point that now when I have like a question or something that I am like making a decision about, and I am wanting to really call in ancestral support and this ancestral resilience, it feels like I'm texting them a question and they like text me back an answer. This is how like the connection feels, that clear. I think that's what I'm thinking about, a text message, because you like send a text, here's a question, here's the answer. That is how clear that it feels. And it's really been attending to that, intentionally growing that connection in order to now be at that place. And it still feels not like I just started, but it is the connection only deepens and grows. And so it feels very tapped in. And like I said, it feels like this infinite resource that I'm able to tap into, which feels very clutch in this moment. And I don't think that isn't by accident. I think that I really believe this. And so if this resonates for you, receive this for yourself, that my ancestors had been preparing me for this moment to also be a support, not only for myself, but also to be a support for my family, to be a support for my community. And so I'm really thankful for that. Another thing that I'll share, because I just shared the example of how it can be this gradual, like tending to a relationship and then have it grow and deepen that connection. But I will say that sometimes, and I'm kind of smiling and laughing, but when I think about this, I can think of a couple of examples for myself, but sometimes ancestors will literally come and shake you down and just have you pay attention. I just snapped my finger over here, just like have you pay attention in a way where it is undeniable. I know this sounds scary. It's not. I know it sounds scary for me to say that. It's not. But I do want to share it with you because I would have loved for someone to have given me a heads up. I had this goal to hit 7 figures in my company, and I did back in 2021. And when I say 7 figures, I mean like 7 figures in a year. Like it was one of my goals to really shatter that glass ceiling, especially as a woman of color, especially as a Latina, as a daughter of immigrants, shatter that glass ceiling. Like, okay, I've started this business. I'm doing work that I really love and believe in, and had this goal of growing my company, my business to 7 figures a year. And when I hit that goal, there was something completely unexpected that happened literally that day. In hindsight, now I'm like, oh, yeah, I totally understand why that needed to happen. But in that moment, it was completely unexpected. What happened literally that day is that it felt for me like out of nowhere. I was just hit by this wall of grief. And what I did know is that grief didn't feel fully mine. Like it wasn't like I lost a loved one or anything like that I could like point to. I was hit with this wall of grief and I was just crying. And I did know enough to know that it felt like generational grief. And now in hindsight, I can look back to this moment in 2021, and I'm so thankful that I can say this and know this and have this feel so clear that was my ancestors having my back, universe, ancestors having my back, literally like turning my gaze, turning my attention. And I am so thankful. They were specifically moving my attention towards doing the work of decolonizing my business and having my work and like go on the journey of decolonizing my business and also of having my work be even more holistic and empowering and powerful and healing, not only more holistically healing, but collectively healing. That is what was happening. I didn't know it in that moment. It felt like, whoa, okay, this is not what I was expecting today. But in hindsight, it was an experience that was undeniable. It was here, and I'm so thankful for it. And I was well supported throughout it as well. So that's why I mean, like, it can sound scary. Like it was unexpected, but even in that unexpectedness of it that I'm describing, it really never was scary because I was supported in it. And when shit hits the fan and there's so many things happening that are so raw and real and heavy, whether it's at a collective level or in my own life, I don't find myself sabotaging with food anymore or emotionally eating past the point of discomfort anymore the way that I used to in my life. But it's not because I'm like, oh, I'm not like shaming myself that I shouldn't be emotionally eating or I shouldn't be sabotaging. And I'm not utilizing power like, no, I need to be good. I need to like maintain my weight or quote unquote stick to my diet. It is none of that. The reason that my behavior has changed when life is stressful or when there's stressful things and tragic things happening in the world or scary things happening in the world, the reason my behavior has changed, the reason my response has changed, and why it isn't self-sabotage anymore, why it isn't emotional eating the way it used to be, is because now I'm so deeply resourced in so many other ways, which is exactly what I've been unpacking in every single episode of this series, of this 8-part series. And what I'm unpacking today specifically is this as being one of my resources and a very powerful one and a very loving and supportive one. I can feel, I've had images and just felt sense of there being an entire army of my ancestors, all dressed in like warrior gear, just standing behind me as far as the eye can see. And that is powerful. It's been so, so powerful. And I share all of this because I believe that if you're attracted to my work and how I teach and the work we're doing here, I would feel confident to say, and I would venture to say, that not only do you have ancestors, but you are in some way called to be an elder, to be a generational healer. And this is ancestral work. And today, in today's conversation, there is an invitation. If you are listening to this episode, you are not listening to it by accident. There is an invitation here to be reminded that what we inherit from our ancestors isn't only echoes of pain. It is deep wisdom, resilience, creativity, art, beauty, community, adaptation, all of what helped them not only to survive, but to thrive. And that same resilience lives in each of us. And so ancestral resilience and generational power is your inheritance. And if you've been feeling the calling, like if you're listening to my voice throughout this episode, and it resonates so deeply because you can recognize these moments of being called and kind of like being tapped on the shoulder by ancestors, being called on your own journey and connecting with this. If you've been feeling the calling, or maybe you're feeling it right now for the first time. Maybe you're feeling it right now with this episode for the first time. Or maybe you are well on this journey. No matter where you are on your journey, let this episode be your reminder that this resilience and power is here, it's available, and it is yours to claim. All right, that is what I have for you today. This is part 6 of our 8-part series. We've got 2 more episodes to come. Next week, I'm going to be talking about self-compassion for old coping habits, if you've been noticing any of those popping up. And part 8, we are going to be talking about community and support. And as I mention every single week, if you would love to be more deeply supported in your own journey, there's different ways that you can work with me. I've got my coaching community, The Last 10, which that is a great match for you if you do have a goal of losing weight, but you want to do it in a way that doesn't just replicate the systems that have created so much of this harm in the first place, like diet culture, white supremacy, colonization, patriarchy, misogyny, all of that. You have a goal to lose weight, but you want to actually heal your relationship with your body, heal your relationship with food. You actually want to serve your life to feel empowered. The Last 10, there is no other place like The Last 10 to do this work in this way. So that is where I would direct you towards. If you're listening and you're like, Brenda, I want to change my emotional eating habits. That is something that I've struggled with. It's something that's been a battle for me, but I don't want that work to be weight focused, and I don't have weight loss as my goal, then I would invite you to check out my 30-day course, She Creates Freedom. And then I also, of course, do offer private coaching. So go to brendalomelli.com, check out the details, and I would be honored to be a support for you on your journey. All right, my sister, I will talk to you soon. Have a beautiful week. I'll see you here next time.